Alright, everyone, and welcome back once again to the adventures of the Monk and the Monarch with me, the Monarch, and as always, my co host, Mildra.
Hello.
So, today we're going back and looking at another just closed down American studio. And today that's going to be Geneon USA, also known as Pioneer and Discotech. Or not Discotech,
No,
Displacer.
discotheque's a whole other beast. And in fact, trying to piece together the history when it comes to Geneon was difficult because that particular company has gone by many different names. Early on, they were part of Pioneer. And Pioneer was originally the Laserdisc Corporation because they made Laserdiscs, which is one of those formats that I've seen some people sing the praises of, but good luck trying to find any. I had a buddy who had one Laserdisc of the Record of Lodoss War OVAs a long ass time ago, but that's as far as it goes. And that was all the way back in the early 80s. Then they were Pioneer LDC, and then when they got acquired by Dentsu in 2003, that was when they became Geneon. Then they merged with Universal Pictures Japan. We get Geneon Universal Entertainment Japan.
Which, frankly, at that point, it has ceased to be anything like the Geneon we all know.
hmm Then in 2013, it's what it's been ever since. NBC Universal Entertainment Japan. And despite that name, they don't distribute any of Universal Pictures films theatrically. That's usually
Yeah.
handled by Toho Toa.
For all intents and purposes, this discussion is essentially up until 2007. Because
Yeah,
that's when the Geneon slash Pioneer we know was effectively dead and gone.
the late 90s through early 2000s was an interesting time to be an anime fan because you had multiple companies doing distribution. You had ADV, which we've already talked about. You had Bandai, who were doing their own thing. You had Viz Media, who is still around, and they were very instrumental in bringing Shonen Jump to the States, even if it was as a monthly magazine instead of a weekly one, because weekly magazines that's usually just rags. Then you had Funimation, often this. Despite the dominance that Funimation has these days, back then they were just a off to the sides. They were most of their stuff was either on the very end of the fringe, or they were just distributing stuff from. Well, at the time they were 4Kids. Now they're 4K Media. Last I checked, I don't know if they changed their name again to stay ahead of the law, but they're most of the stuff that they were handling was the stuff that was on like Kids WB or something back in the day. And then there was Pioneer, who was very quiet when it came to anime, and with that boom that happened in the 2000s, they further expanded outward. And eventually Pioneer rebranded to Geneon Entertainment. This would have been in 2003. And there is a long list
Yeah.
of anime, to the point that if we were to go through the sheer amount of stuff that they've made, we'd be here for days. Or not made, I should say distributed.
Now, it should be noted, they did both distribution and at times dubs. They've released
Yes.
other dubs. It's kind of hard to sit here and go through because we have to look at each individual show under their label to know which
hmm
ones they actually dubbed themselves or which ones they dubbed and released.
Yeah. Now it should be note obviously when it comes to examining distribution of anime, we're going to have a bit of a skew towards the North American side,
Yes.
especially the US and Canada. That's also why I'm not bringing up like Manga Entertainment, who had more of a foothold in the UK than they did in the States.
Some
That's
of
not to
their
say
stuff
they
got here, but yeah.
Yeah, but it was a scant handful of things, especially when everybody else was grabbing every license that they could get their hands on, and they were too slow on the uptick. because like some, especially since a lot of the stuff that they had gotten was during that OVA bubble, or was stuff that would be on the fringe, and then get a second chance at life when the whole Anna Monday thing on the Sci-Fi Channel was a thing. Something that has produced a few infamous memes, but
Another thing I do kind of want to point out, like, it can be a little annoying to try to find out where they technically started, just because there's no really nice list I could find. What I did
there's
find, it when like sorry, like the earliest one listed for any series they were on the best organized site is Lupin the Third Part 2, which is not entirely correct because they were the second dubbing studio, which happened in the early 2000s. As far as I can tell, like the first actual series that you can credit to them was El Hazard the Wanderers, as far as series, whereas the earliest OVA was Bastard.
and we should clarify the original Bastard,
Yes.
obviously.
Which fantastic if you haven't seen it. I still haven't watched the remake. I heard it's a good one though.
It's a full 26 episode season instead of a bunch of OVAs for
Unfinished
a month.
manga.
Yeah, I'm not saying that you should wait until an anime is finished, but at least wait until you got a few arcs under your belt before making an anime.
Yeah.
That's just a pet peeve. That's just a pet peeve of mine. Even when it comes to stuff that I like say Akira. I love Akira to death, but but I don't know. I don't know. Maybe splitting that into two movies so you could get more of what was in the book, since the manga wasn't finished when that movie was in production.
I don't
Um,
know if you're gonna fit all that into one movie is the weird thing.
which is why I would have done too. I know that that was a bit of a radical concept back in the 80s, but getting getting back at it.
I think it's easy to pinpoint the very early moment in in the life of them releasing stuff where they gained their name,
Hmm.
and that was the OVA for Tenchi Muyo. As far as the West is concerned, the godfather of the harem anime. There's probably
Well,
some before, but
Tenchi Muyo was the first anime that they released under Laserdisc in 1992. I did try and see if I can find out why they chose the name Geneon. I couldn't find anything.
yeah, that I had nothing there. This was a weird bit of a struggle to kind of find out much information about.
Yeah, and yeah, some of it is because Japanese companies tend to be very closed off. But there's also but it also has to do with the fact that we're dealing with divisions, playing a game of musical chairs with each other.
Yeah, all in all, I think even to this day you can kind of see Tenchi's relevance.
Yeah,
So that was a
actually,
big one early on.
actually, never mind. I did find out it was a portmanteau of generate and eon.
I was expecting something slightly more interesting than that for some reason.
It certainly fits. And the thing that's kind of funny is when Pioneer started the animation department, it was part of a two-pronged thing to try and get more eyes on Laserdisc. The other was Pioneer Classics, which was focused on classical music. Not entirely sure if you're going to get more eyes on Laserdiscs with classical music. That's always going to be a certain niche. Of course, Pioneer Animation didn't just do anime, but they also did soundtracks. In fact, Pioneer was probably one of the bigger pushers for getting soundtracks of various anime into the States. And I know because that first wave, I ended up grabbing every single one of them.
Like if I recall, they were responsible for a lot of soundtracks of shows that weren't even necessarily under their banner for release.
Yeah, some of the early ones that I ended up grabbing was soundtracks for the Rurouni Kenshin OVAs, Macross Plus, Lost Universe, which was distributed by ADV. Actually, I should note some of these. I may be cross wiring this with some of the ones that ADV did because they had their own music division as well as one at one point. But there were a few that were handled by Pioneer. I do know that at least.
I think they may actually have one of the largest libraries of soundtrack releases here in the States. At least back in
They,
those days.
they certainly weren't lacking for variety. I can say that much.
It's actually something interesting, like when you look over their dubs, this is a huge variety of stuff. Like entirely unrelated themes, genres.
Yeah, and
They'd grab just about anything that they thought they could make good.
well, around that time, it was like the floodgates had opened up, and everybody was trying to grab everything, as I said before. And this also meant that there was quite a bit of variety because unlike say Bandai, they didn't have that one series to build around. Like Bandai, obviously they're gonna have control over the release of any Gundam series. So which is we all remember that big ass box set of Gundam Wing that would sit in the video store taunting us. Just this long thing that cost like $200 and was 10 DVDs. There were a bunch of other different projects that were under their banner. One that I have a bit of fondness for was Heat Guy J.
Sadly, that's one I've still not gotten around to seeing.
That was an early project by Satellite, and is a interesting beast, especially given its soundtrack. And obviously, as mentioned, Tenchi Muyo was one of their first. The other thing that certainly helped really expand was getting a deal with Toei Animation to distribute.
And I believe that only lasted for a few years, that deal, but.
It only lasted 2 years,
Yeah.
and all that stuff went out of print.
It's another interesting, though, to kind of look over their catalog.
Hmm.
I think even compared to some others, like, these guys had a lot of successes. Like the Tenchi stuff. They were responsible for the redubs of the uncut Sailor Moon episodes.
That was a big one, since obviously everybody's made their fair share of memes about the Nelvana slash Deke era of Sailor Moon, and all of the changes that were done. Since I think around this time there was a bit of a push to try and have do-overs of early attempts at bringing anime stateside that were just were, were just butchered to all hell. I remember that there was a brief bit of time where it seemed like 4Kids was going to try that as well. The only reason 4Kids claimed that the only reason their take didn't last was because the sales weren't strong enough. Nobody really believes that. It's far more likely the reason it didn't happen was because their partnership with Funimation fell through. I should note for a while Viz was working with with Pioneer. That's how we got Ranma 1/2. Until Viz decided, screw this, we'll just make the DVDs ourselves. But just looking at the size of the matter, there's just on the wiki alone, there's like 148 different anime that they had a hand in.
Yeah, and again, a lot of these are either at least cult classics, notable successes. Like throughout the 90s, the early 2000s, they really weren't having anything that I'd look at and go, that was a loss or just a failed endeavor outside of a couple. Like what, X, the TV series and the movie.
X is a complicated matter.
Yeah.
I will simply state that if somebody wants more detail, they can go look at the early episode of Geek Watch where we talked about it. That's as far as I'm going.
Yeah. But Vandred, which did fairly well back then and is still going on with newish series today. I don't know too much about that, but
I've seen obviously one of the big ones that was a cult hit for the longest time, and then got a renewed chance during its run on Adult Swim is Trigun.
yeah, that was the 99, right? Was Trigun? I
Yeah,
love the show. I don't remember exactly the year, but that was a huge hit.
I think it even got its own figures by Todd McFarlane's company.
Weirdly enough, I had a figure before I knew what Trigun was. Just one of my aunts got it for me as a friend. Like, oh, this looks neat.
Yeah, that certainly tracks.
And not to mention Paranoia Agent.
Which has gone on to be one of the cult classics of its era.
But yeah, just this list. It's one of those things that makes you wonder what happened.
Mm-hmm.
How did someone who had this many successful releases and known releases just end up shutting down? Because I know when they became Geneon, like this section of Pioneer was sold off. Like someone else bought Geneon.
Well, what ended up happening was there was plans on a partnership with
ADV.
Yep, where they would take over the heavy lifting when it came to the properties that they were distributing, and
Like
they
effectively they fired a bunch of their staff. Like
they didn't fire them, they laid them off.
Laid them off, yeah. But a bunch of people laid off for the thing with AVD, and then for reasons I cannot track down for the life of me, the deal fell through.
Yeah. The only statement we ever got was that they were unable to reach a mutual agreement, which strikes me as not very smart, because this essentially means that you made all these moves for a deal that you hadn't finalized.
Now, as we know, ADV themselves only had a couple more years to go before they too were out. So, color me suspicious that there's a lot more to this that we do not know happened behind the scenes.
I know it's there's a certain romanticism to the idea that there was some conspiracy or some shit like that, but you look throughout history and usually the explanation is far simpler. In my opinion, I think the issue was they didn't know who was getting coffee. I think it just boils down to that. Nobody could agree on who was going to be the coffee guy. Which I don't mean that as a 1-to-1 kind of thing. Just that you had two sides and both of them wanted to be the people in charge of the distribution and all that, and neither one could see eye to eye on it.
I believe in the official statement it was ADV would be in charge of the distribution. Let me see, I think I had it on one of my many tabs. Yes, the actual statement. Let's see. Today, ADV Films and Geneon Entertainment USA announced a new distribution agreement. From October 1st on, ADV Films will be Geneon Entertainment USA's sole distributor. ADV Films will handle all sales and distribution duties for the combined catalog, as well as certain marketing functions. Geneon is a subsidiary of Tokyo-based giant Dentsu, blah 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 for that one. This is a great alliance, says Geneon President and CEO Eiji Ori. The efficiencies we'll achieve ultimately will mean more anime for fans to enjoy. This was made just months before the closure of Geneon. So the idea was ADV was going to be the distributor. Were I to make my conjectures, I think Geneon didn't realize the current financial state of ADV in 2007.
I could see that, especially given how there's a tendency for companies to exaggerate how they're doing.
Yeah, I suspect that might have had something to do with it. Especially since we know now in hindsight, ADV was not looking well.
And there's various reasons as to why, which we've already covered.
So yeah, it's a situation like I don't think it was necessarily like anything Geneon or what was the people that owned them Dentsu really fucked up on their end until they realized, hey, we have a good thing we can do with ADV here, make our lives easier, benefit everybody, and then they jumped the gun with the layoffs. Because I don't believe they were doing poorly like ADV was. I could be wrong on that, but
truth be told, the big reason why a lot of those companies were in the state that they were had to do with the fact that they used what they had gotten from the anime bubble from the early 2000s, and jumped onto a bunch of other things, but it was also just that was right during that bit of that economic recession, because everybody was hurting. Tokyo Pop was hurting, ADV was hurting, everybody.
Yeah, that was a bit of
And
a rough time for a lot of people.
so it's one of those things where you can't where I can't really pin the blame on one person or on one side in this kind of thing. And obviously a lot of the much like with ADV, a lot of the licenses that they had would get picked up by Funimation. However, not however, much like ADV as well, not all of them would. There's still some that are in the limbo or in the ether. Some of them have gotten picked up by Retro Crush, but there's a lot in the there's a lot that hasn't. And obviously, I'm not going to go through every single entry and figure out which ones have and haven't, especially since I do not have Crunchyroll account anymore.
And
I
Christ, it
did
would
for a
take a
bit.
while to go through all of these series.
Yeah, and of course it's mainly the more hidden ones that is the case. It's for that reason that you're not going to see you're not going to see me wagging the finger regar, regarding regarding the high seas question. Simply because there's going to be even though there's a lot more stuff that gets distributed these days, there's always going to be those ones that go right through the cracks.
No, that said, I do think if Geneon had been a little smarter and not jumped the gun at the end there, they might have still been around. If not for at least a few more years. I think they could have hung on like Viz did.
Hmm. I could certainly see it.
Because I know Hellsing Ultimate was like one of the last ones they were working on, and I recall that
Yeah,
doing very well.
it did, which is saying, but it wasn't too much of a surprise that they got it because they had gotten the Gonzo Helsing.
They were involved with both Hellsing and Hellsing Ultimate, weren't they?
Yeah, though at least in the early stages, I think with the later OVAs, it was handled by somebody else. Though I could be wrong on.
They were handling Ultimate. What happened is they shut down.
Hmm.
Like the fourth OVA, I believe, which kind of left everyone wondering: is this going to finish? Are we ever going to get the rest of this? Then, in due time, I believe it was Funimation that picked up the last two volumes and finished it up. Just a relief to me because I already owned all the DVDs up until that point.
Yeah, I could very much see that. And as far as the legacy, it's something that is an interesting curiosity for historians, as well as I think for somebody like me a window into a bigger variety anime being discussed, because the key thing is variety in this instance. the sh- Obviously the shonen battle manga will have their dominant position, and that's not changing anytime soon. But what I appreciated during this era, and Pioneer is no exception to this, is that there was no genre that was untouched. You know, something for everybody, which there always has been in anime. It's just that a lot of people don't really see it.
Because there's a lot of shows they've released that were never the biggest thing, but they were successful. The variety, like I think they might have the highest rate of successes of any show we've probably or any studio we've covered so far. At least in terms of shows that they managed to get their money back on, I believe. Even in
Hmm.
those later years before their closure, which is what I think makes this one a little weird compared to the others. See, what were their last few ones for anime series? Fate Stay Night, Ergo Proxy, both in 2006. The Helsing OVAs from '06 to '07.
I think I can't remember what their. I think Helsing Ultimate may have been one of their last. I think there something else that I think didn't help matters was everybody had dialed themselves in hardcore on the whole on demand model. That by 2008, that model was on its way out.
Yeah, that's one of the reasons I recall them talking about in that press statement. Like, I only read the Geneon bit, but from ADV's standpoint in the 2007 statement, they were talking about kind of their more online, digital, on-demand stuff.
I mean, the concept of on demand was certainly a stepping stone to the streaming models that we have today, but it was kind of bleeding edge at that point, and it was a royal pain to actually get it set up depending on your service, plus depending on where you were, you couldn't even get it.
As far as I recall, though, Geneon hadn't actually gotten involved in that model at all. But
At least not direct. At least
yeah,
not direct.
that's just the way they were going to start going in with the ADV
Mm-mm.
partnership. It's possible they thought that was going to be a bigger deal than it ended up being. Hence, one of the reasons they wanted to work with ADV.
Possibly.
Also, the whole anime network.
Hmm.
That was still around in 2007, right?
I think, though, I'd also imagine that trying to set up a whole digital
Yeah.
network like that was hella expensive.
So, yeah, the story of Geneon, it was just more bad circumstance than anything related to what the studio themselves actually did from the looks of it. Again, this is a hard one to really come to a solid conclusion on because, as you mentioned, a lot of the Japanese companies are very private, and Geneon is always, while it's the American branch, it's always been owned by a Japanese company.
And as far as the Japanese end of what would become Geneon, eventually there would be a bunch of shifting around to the point where it effectively became part of the Universal branch. Even though they're still not getting much of Universal's American stuff, that's still that's still being distributed by Toho.
Yeah, Geneon's basically, even under the new names post 2007, it's not really done anything.
Well,
There is some stuff.
as now the NBC Universal Japan, they do a lot of stuff. It's just that they don't do stuff that directly comes out of Universal. They do their own
Yeah.
stuff.
Said every company that has actually owned Geneon or Pioneer at some point, still around.
Yeah, it's still around. It's though if I have any say about it, I will never do I won't say I'll never do, but it'll be quite a while before I do this level of labyrinthing examination of different companies.
Yeah.
I say that, and I know that in a future episode or in something on my own show, I'm probably gonna end up reneging on that.
It's inevitable. I'm mostly annoyed because, again, it's a bunch of research done on this. Very little concrete information can actually be found about this, which is very frustrating.
Especially for guys like us who prefer doing research.
Like, even the statements just barely give us any indication of what happened. There wasn't really talk after Geneon closed down about the deal falling through besides just the one statement. No one
Hmm.
from either side of like Japan or the US side of the branches have come out and said anything as far as I've been able to find. No disgruntled employees complaining about what happened.
Well, I knew that part was never
Yeah.
going to be, but
I'd have expected at least the US, like on the US side, maybe someone's talked about it. But no, nothing.
I have a feeling I know it'd be tempting to say that that NDAs have been involved, but I think it's far more accurate I think it'd be far more accurate to say that a lot of the people that were still at say Geneon got grabbed up by Funimation or just disappeared.
It does make me think it probably wasn't the worst place to have worked for at the time, but what can you do? If no one's talking about it, it's not like we're gonna know anything beyond speculation at this point. Again, like even when you're looking at releases, like you can kind of see what happened with ADV with just picking up so many titles, a lot of which probably didn't ended up not doing so well. You didn't have that here. So I can't even see like looking at like market trends or bad decisions that they obviously made. to point the blame to. That is a very unsatisfying conclusion.
It is, but unfortunately, sometimes those are the conclusions you get stuck with.
That said, they released a lot of titles a lot of people remember, so they left their mark on the anime industry here in the States, so good on Geneon. Glad they were around for as long as they were.
But I'd say that's as strong of a coda as we will get for this kind of thing.
Yeah. That said, so I guess then we wrap up our talk on Geneon here. Next month when we return with adventures, the current plan is to talk about one of the stranger anime directors out there, Nabashin. That'll be an interesting topic.
Oh yeah, the guy who kept making tall guy jokes.
The Japanese man with an afro.
In all fairness, that sort of afro hair is not as uncommon as some people think it is.
It's just when you compare it with his weird outfit.
Yeah, Nabashin is Nabashin. That's what.
But we'll be tackling that next month. So with that, we will see you guys next time.
Stay frosty.